Man, I'm so excited to finally get to ride Steel Curtain this year. It's been so long.
Yeah, I heard they made a ton of really good changes this year too.
Yeah, everyone complained about this thing being broken, but it's finally open again, and I'm so excited to ride it. What the f-
For decades, Kennywood has been known as one of the more unique amusement parks in the United States because of its blend of old and new. You can ride a coaster that's 100 years old and then walk 5 minutes and ride one of the fastest hypercoasters in the country. In the past 10 years, however, Kennywood has been closing some of their older attractions in favor of newer rides, which makes sense from a business perspective, but these newer rides often come with some unintended consequences. First off, I'm sure you guys want to hear my thoughts on the recent ride closure announcements, so I'll be talking about that at the end of the video. If you'd like to jump straight there, then go to this time marker now. In the past decade, most of the new attractions Kennywood has added to the park have been prototypes, brand new attraction designs that are the first of their kind, which makes sense when you consider that this is a park famous for having rare or otherwise impossible to find rides. However, not all is good in the park when it comes to these first of their kind attractions. I'd like to go over 3 of Kennywood's biggest additions from the last 10 years, and the various operational problems they've had, most of which stem from them being the first of their kind. In 2009, Kennywood made the announcement that they would be removing their Turnpike electric car ride, which had been in its location at the park's entrance since 1966. In 2010, this plot of land became the home of Skyrocket, a prototype LSM launch coaster from Premier Rides. This coaster began with a launch to 50 miles per hour into a vertical top hat, and also featured 3 inversions. Despite some criticism towards its second half being uninspired, Skyrocket has proven to be a decently popular coaster for the park. If the name Skyrocket sounds familiar, it's because Premier Rides would fine-tune this design into what is now known as the Skyrocket 2 model, of which 9 have been installed at various parks around the world. This, however, would be the only Skyrocket 1 ever built. The coaster operated reliably until May of 2018, when the generator for the launch motors overheated and filled the air with smoke. It was clear that the generator needed to be replaced, but the process of replacing the generator was long and arduous, requiring one to be built from scratch since the coaster is the only one of its model in existence. And no, they couldn't just use parts from a Skyrocket 2, as those are actually different. After numerous manufacturing and shipping delays with the generator coming from overseas, as well as modifications needing to be done to the generator shed to house the new larger component, Skyrocket finally reopened to the public on July 14, 2019, 14 months later. This long period of downtime has given Skyrocket a bad reputation with the locals, and you can still find comments on Kennywood's social media pages critiquing the coaster for never being open, even though it's been operating consistently since it reopened. Midway through the 2020 season, one of Skyrocket's 2 trains lost a wheel, and the coaster was forced to operate with only 1 train for the rest of the season, leading to the line almost always filling the entire queue. At the time of this video, it's unsure if the second train will be back up and running for 2021.
Nope.
In 2011, Kennywood closed Pitfall, their second-generation Intamin drop tower, due to high maintenance costs, and replaced it the following year with Black Widow, the first Zamperla giant discovery in the United States. Although this ride isn't technically a prototype, it did have a design difference from those that preceded it, that being the loading platform that pulls away from the pendulum instead of having the floor dropping down. Black Widow proved to be one of the most popular flat rides in Kennywood's recent history, and videos of the ride in motion quickly went viral, further increasing interest in the ride. Black Widow even had a decently themed entrance with a giant spider on top, where you walked through a spider-filled cave. The ride would continue to operate until July of 2018, when it was closed for unknown reasons. It would remain closed for the rest of that year, and although it was seen testing in 2019, it did not open for that year either. The 2020 season would be more of the same, and it has now been over 2 years since Widow was last open to the public. The current consensus is that the ride needed a replacement gearbox, but the one that Zamperla provided the park with broke down soon after installation. The second gearbox worked, but by the time that arrived, it had been a year and a half since Widow first went down. Not helping matters is the fact that the replacement gearbox could only be installed during the off-season, as it required the park to bring in a large crane next to the ride. Despite rumors of the ride being removed, Black Widow was seen testing in October 2020, so hopefully we can see this ride return to operation next year. Now it's time for the big one. Steel Curtain, the glorious statue that it is, has been closed to the public for the entire 2020 season. Steel Curtain replaced the classic Aero log flume log jammer, and many were upset about the latter's removal due to it being the last Aero log flume to feature a spillway drop element. Kennywood partnered with S&S Worldwide to construct Steel Curtain, the largest coaster S&S have ever constructed. With 9 inversions, Steel Curtain broke the North American inversion record as well as the record for the tallest inversion in the world. At the time of its opening, the coaster got off to a rough start due to frequent downtime, but this can be attributed to the park skipping a soft opening period so as to get the coaster open as soon as possible. First opening on July 13, 2019, Steel Curtain frequently ran only one train, if it was even open at all. Going to the park late in the season was a gamble because you could never be sure if the coaster was going to be open or not. Despite these issues, Steel Curtain finished the season having operated off and on for about 3 months. Since many did not want to wait in the long lines to ride it, most people were hoping to get their first Steel Curtain rides in 2020, but this would not come to be. Even though Kennywood operated a very limited season in 2020, Steel Curtain would not open to guests at all. The reason for this has never been publicly revealed, but what is currently believed is that the coaster is undergoing modifications to its seatbelts and dispatch system that require the park to make the 1,000 required test runs in order to reopen. Although the coaster never ran during park hours, test trains were being sent daily at around 7 a.m., so that would seem to back up this claim. Although Steel Curtain never opened in 2020, Kennywood still proudly advertised the coaster as the best new coaster of 2019, although nobody could ride it. This upset more than a few people who had purchased season passes with the hopes of riding the new coaster. Once again, being a first-of-its-kind coaster, it was obvious that Steel Curtain was going to have some bugs to work out, but nobody could have predicted it would have this much trouble reopening. I've got my fingers crossed that we'll see this coaster reopen for 2021, alongside the rest of the Steelers country area. So by now I'm sure you've noticed a pattern. Kennywood opens a new ride and it operates fine for a few years before having some sort of substantial breakdown. Steel Curtain is the odd one out here since that's been having issues since before it opened, but it still proves my point, which is that purchasing these prototype rides is a huge gamble for Kennywood, and I think it's doing them more harm than good. In recent years, the park has gathered a reputation with the locals as having more closed rides than open ones, and these 3 have certainly contributed to that. On the one hand, I can understand why the park is choosing these rides. They have a reputation for having rare and unique attractions that you can't find at many other parks, and they take that reputation and mix it with the old and new. So if you want to ride the only Mobius loop coaster in the United States and then go ride the giant 9 inversion hypercoaster, you can do that. So what's the best way to go about getting a one-of-a-kind attraction? Well, it's probably purchasing a prototype ride because it's guaranteed to be one of a kind, at least for a while, so with that in mind, Kennywood ends up with a lot of really unique attractions. But let's stop beating around the bush here, alright? The reason Kennywood buys these prototypes is because they're cheap. Since most of them are the first of their kind, the park saves a lot of money by letting themselves be the guinea pigs and allowing the manufacturers to install their new ride prototypes here. If the ride works, great, Kennywood just saved a bunch of money. But if the ride breaks down a lot, the park can blame the manufacturer and save even more money on the repairs, while the manufacturer can iron out the issues for future iterations of the ride. From a business perspective, it's a foolproof plan, but from the perspective of someone who's just visiting the park, it gives the impression that the park is cheap and doesn't care to maintain or operate all of their attractions. Now, I don't mean to give the impression that I dislike these rides. I think Skyrocket is underrated, in the first half anyway. Black Widow is a ride that I always enjoy, and Steel Curtain is an ambitious and relentless barrage of inversions. I do, however, think that the park is going about making their attractions stand out in the wrong way. Some of you might disagree with me here, but it's a bad look for the park when the brand new award-winning coaster is having a ton of downtime while the coaster that's 100 years old is operating consistently right next to it. Look at Phantom too, not a rare ride model, Morgan hypercoasters are common enough, but rare in its layout which interacts with the terrain. So, am I against Kennywood continuing to invest in prototype rides? No, not at all. But I want to see more than just prototypes added in the future. It's okay every once in a while to add something that's not unique, but is just a tried and true enjoyable ride. I hope the park doesn't continue down the path of adding unreliable attractions, but being that the park seems to be erasing their lineup of rare flat rides, this might just be the case. Speaking of which, I think it's about time that I get into that news, so let's get started. Hi everyone, it's Jonathan from Rampaging Rex Productions, and I'm here to discuss the very unfortunate news that came out of Kennywood recently. Now, I'm going unscripted for this part, so I apologize if my narration doesn't sound as good as it normally does, but I just really wanted to talk about this and get my opinion out there and what this news means to me. So, for those of you that haven't heard yet, on November 3rd, just out of nowhere really, Kennywood announced that they would be retiring 4 of their attractions. Now, this is big news already because it's very rare that we lose so many rides at once, but on top of that, the rides that we are losing are very rare and classic attractions that have been there for a long time. All 4 of these rides have been there since before I was born, so you can tell that I've grown up riding these rides. So let's go in order here from least to most important to me. So first off is Paratrooper, which I did grow up riding. These are all important to me, I want to say. I don't mean for that to be taken the wrong way, but I did grow up riding all 4 of these. Paratrooper is the one that I'm least upset about losing. Not because I didn't like it. It was a really fun family attraction, but paratroopers are still kind of common at parks. I rode the one at Knoebels earlier this year, but still, this was a great ride for families, and kids always enjoyed it. Had a great set of LED lights on it. Always look great at night. So this is one that is going to be very sad to be losing. But then we have Volcano, which I think a few of us knew was going to be removed at some point soon. Like, Huss Enterprises are getting harder and harder to find. Cedar Point removed theirs a couple years ago, so it was only a matter of time before Kennywood lost theirs. We've been seeing parks remove these constantly over the past few years. But what really confuses me here is that a couple years ago, for those of you that didn't know, around 2016, Kennywood's Enterprise, Volcano, whatever you want to call it, was in bad shape. So they actually replaced it. They completely replaced the ride with the Enterprise from Lake Compounds, which was being removed anyway to make room for Phobia Fear Coaster. So why, from my point of view here, why put forth all that effort into relocating the ride when you're only going to get 4 years of operation out of it? It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And that kind of makes me think that this was a very sudden decision. This wasn't something that was calculated or something that they had been contemplating for a while. This was a spur-of-the-moment decision. But it's sad to lose another Huss Enterprise, but I think we could all see this one going within the next couple of years. Well, before the announcement, at least. Then we have Bayern Kurve, which is a ride that I overlooked for years. I did not get my first ride on it until last year, if you can believe that. I just never thought much of it. I always thought the loud horn on it was annoying, but then I rode it for the first time, and I was blown away. So I became a huge fan of this ride. And this is another one that's a shame, because I think there's only like 4 or 5 Schwarzkopf Bayern Kurves left operating. Feel free to correct me on the number in the comments there. But it's just such a shame to be losing something like this, because it's so unique. I mean, I know some people that count this thing as a roller coaster, because it sort of kind of is. I don't personally, but that's up to you. But I always like the lights on this. It had some pretty retro-looking theming, and very underrated ride for Kennywood, to say the least. And then here we have the one that hurts the most, which is Kangaroo. This is an attraction that's been here since 1964, and it's the last of its kind. It's extremely unique. Unique is actually an understatement for this ride. It's the only one left. The ride model was called the Flying Coaster, even though it's not a coaster. And it's just the vehicles go in a circle, and you launch off this ramp, and you get a little pop of airtime off of it. And that's all it was. But it was so fun, especially when you pack a lot of people into the seats with you. I was lucky where I got to get my final ride on the last, not on the last day of operation this year, but one of the last days that the ride was open, because it actually shut down midway through the season because it lost a wheel. But a couple of days before that happened, I was able to ride it with some of my friends, and we packed 4 of us into one seat together, and I was getting smushed, and it was so funny. So, at the very least, I'm glad I got a memorable final ride on it. But the first 3 attractions that I listed, Paratrooper, Volcano, and Bayern Kurve, I could kind of understand why they were removing them. Well, Volcano and Bayern Kurve, maybe. Paratrooper doesn't seem like it took a ton of maintenance. But Kangaroo, just why? It was the last of its kind. They're basically killing off an entire ride model. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I know that the park gave reasons for the closure in their social media posts. They say like that it's just not worth it to keep maintaining these rides when it's so hard to get parts. And that's an excuse I could see for Volcano easily, because Huss doesn't make those anymore. But Kangaroo, like the park's been making parts for that in-house for years. Why is it suddenly a problem now? And here's the other thing. These 4 rides don't take up a lot of space. Well, combined they do, because Kennywood is an extremely landlocked park, but separately, they're very small attractions, so there's not a whole lot that I can see going in here to replace them. Like, Bayern Kurve especially takes up a very small section of space there, so really the only thing I could see replacing it would maybe be another concession stand, which that's just what Kennywood needs, isn't it? I mean, the only thing that I could see happening there is that maybe the space with Paratrooper and Kangaroo could be used for something, because they're right next to each other. But even then, like, it's such a small space. So yeah, nobody get your hopes up with this. We're not seeing a roller coaster come out of this. Kennywood needs some new flats after this. And this kind of ties back into something I've been thinking about for a while, which is the park has been teasing recently the return of the Turnpike attraction, the Turnpike cars, their electric car ride that used to be where Skyrocket is. And there's even a gravestone inside the old mill there that kind of teases it. The gravestone says, T. Pike, I'll be back. So what if all this is preparing for the return of the Turnpike? Some people might like that, but for me, from my perspective here, it's not worth it. It's not worth it to sacrifice 4 of these classic rides that so many people have ridden and so many people love riding every year when they go to the park, just so you can get an antique car ride back. It's not worth it if you ask me. I don't think that's what they're doing, because I don't think that's enough room to put the Turnpike back in, but man, we just need some new flats after this, and I can't believe that they're removing these 4 rides, especially Kangaroo. There's a petition that's going around that somebody created that has, I think it's almost at 5,000 signatures at the time I'm recording this. I'll link to it in the description if you guys want to sign it. I don't know if it's going to change anything. I'm not getting my hopes up here, but it never hurts, you know? So you can tell that people are very passionate about these rides. The locals here, they've had these rides growing up and for generations. So every single one of the posts that Kennywood did about these ride removals on their Facebook is just flooded with angry reacts, and it's easy to see why. Not helping things is that the park, like, whenever they posted about the ride removals, they credit, like, oh yeah, Thomastown and Steelers Country and stuff, and I'm like, okay guys, well, not everybody likes Thomastown, okay? I think it's fine, but that's not something to brag about. And Steelers Country didn't even entirely open yet. The Steelers Experience building didn't open this year, and Steel Curtain didn't operate at all. So, guys, if you're going to be replacing stuff with attractions like these, then I don't think you're headed down the right direction. But then, I guess we kind of come full circle here, because that's what I talked about earlier in this video. But yeah, all in all, I'm just really disappointed in the park here. I wonder if this is the doing of the new GM. Because if it is, I hope he has a plan in place here. I hope he's got something on his mind to replace these attractions with, because it's going to hurt next year going into the park and seeing these 4 just empty plots of land where these rides once were. Actually, knowing Kennywood, they're not even going to be empty yet. They're going to be like half disassembled, so that's going to rub salt in the wound even more. But I'm just so disappointed in the park because of this. I mean, I think it hurts more for the locals than it does for people who would be traveling to the park from farther away, because for most people that travel to the park, the roller coasters are what matter. But still, I've seen people come to visit to ride like Kangaroo and stuff. So that's going to hurt. But I guess I'm just repeating myself at this point. So I'd like to hear what all of you think of these announcements. So make sure to put those down in the comments, and I'll reply to as many as I can. And as always, thank you all for watching, and stay tuned for more roller coaster content coming soon on Rampaging Rex Productions. See you next time, guys.